So let's say you are interested in classic literature, but you are also a massive nerd. What book is going to help both of those interests? I would recommend... Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher's Bookshelf, where we consider books that are philosophically interesting. Today we're going to go over one of my faves. In fact, I just finished reading this for probably the fifth time, something like that, with my children. I have an 11-year-old boy, a 5-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl. And of course, the 1-year-old girl has no idea what's going on. But the other two love The Hobbit. They love Lord of the Rings. We just finished last year the whole cycle, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And this year, we just finished some other book, and I was like, all right, what are we going to read next? We read every night before bed. And they were like, The Hobbit, Dad, The Hobbit. We got to read The Hobbit. By the way, I would recommend, if you are going to check out this book, then there are some copies of this with Alan Lee's illustrations. If you're a big illustration person, I suggest you check those out. Those are pretty good. In any case, you might think that The Hobbit doesn't have all that much philosophy if you've read this before. If that's the case, I suggest check out my podcast. I'm going to do one on philosophy and fiction, and I argue in that podcast that all fiction necessarily has some philosophy, even if it's not the focus of the book. And that's what's interesting, especially about J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote this book, The Hobbit. He didn't make philosophy the focus. In fact, he thought that was a bad way to go about doing fiction. One of his best good friends, C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, thought the opposite. He started with the philosophy and then wrote the book. Interesting. Now we'll talk about that in the podcast. Let me give you a quick synopsis. I'll give you a few details, and then throw out some philosophy questions for you guys. So the setting is Middle Earth. Middle Earth is something kind of like regular Earth, except for throw in a bunch of elves, dwarves, etc., etc. J.R.R. Tolkien is really the gold standard in fantasy literature. You know, all the stuff that you see in that. If you ever go to Barnes & Noble, you see that huge section, right? Sci-fi and fantasy. The fantasy section is pretty much inspired by this guy. If you are also, by the way, if you're into Dungeons and Dragons and that kind of stuff, which my children are forcing me to do now, which is actually kind of fun, but definitely growing up in the 80s, that was kind of like the nerdy thing for people to do. Now it's kind of like, yeah, okay, I'm enjoying it. Don't judge. So here's what happens. Years and years ago, a dragon came in and took over a dwarf, like underground castle kind of a thing. It's like a mountain, but it's a citadel type of thing underneath it. And they had all this treasure. They were, super good at making treasure. And the dragon came in, killed almost all the dwarves, stole all the treasure, piled it up in the middle, and sleeps on it every night. 13 dwarves are going to go on a mission to get the gold back. How are they going to get the gold? I don't know. Right? They don't. It doesn't seem like they have a great plan, but they think it would be a good idea to bring along a thief, somebody who is going to be good at going in, infiltrating, getting stuff, and taking it out. They talk to a wise old sorcerer named Gandalf. I know you're already probably, if you have never read this kind of stuff, you're probably already like, whoa, buddy, like slow down, right? Wizards, goblins, what? This guy Gandalf, it's worth it. It's a good book. Gandalf tells them, I got somebody for you. He goes into this little place called the Shire, and he finds a hobbit. Now, Hobbit, as far as I know, the hobbits are only in J.R.R. Tolkien's work. Like, he has elves and dwarves and all kinds of other stuff like that. But hobbits, I think, are unique to Tolkien. I'm not a Tolkien scholar. I'm a philosopher, but that likes the books, right? So those kind of details I'm not going to be great on. What's going to be unique about this one is that I can look at this book from a philosopher's perspective and sort of see some questions in there. Any case, Gandalf chooses this guy. And Bilbo Baggins is the guy's name, does not want to go. Most of these hobbits hate adventures. They live very comfortable lives. They don't want to get up out of their seats where they, have multiple meals, more than 3 meals a day, and go off and put themselves in harm's way. They even are suspicious of people that are going to go off and put themselves in harm's way. First question already, I think. This is the first interesting philosophical question to my mind. What makes it worthwhile to put yourself in harm's way? Because think about it, these guys are going back to get gold, right? Is it really that important to get all that money that you are willing to sacrifice your life, possibly? That's definitely not, in my mind, a great trade. So one way you could look at this is to say the whole thing is jacked up from the beginning, right? These guys have a terrible quest that they have decided to go on, and because of it, they are putting their lives at risk. If any of them die, this is an unethical, situation that's come about. Another way to look at it, and I think this is probably Tolkien's way to look at it, is, granted, going after gold isn't the greatest thing, but in a large part, as humans, and I know this guy's a hobbit and there are the dwarves and all this stuff, but as humans at least, a good deal of our lives is spent going after achievements, really for the sake of going after achievements rather than the achievements themselves, right? Imagine, some people will, let's say, I used to like football a lot. I played football in high school, and I really wanted to be in the NFL. There was zero chance that I was going to NFL, but I thought, it'd be so cool if I could be a pro football player. And pro, football players, they get injured. Some of them can even die, you can get paralyzed from that stuff. Right now, I really like surfing. I've been surfing, for, 10 years now or something like that. Love the sport. It is amazing, but it can get dangerous, right? You definitely get those butterflies in the tummy. And when you go out there and you, let's say, start to make big tackles, that you didn't know you could do, or you go out and surf on a bigger wave than you've ever gone on, right? Even though you were so spooked at first. There's something about that, that I think maybe makes our lives richer, builds character as well, possibly, right? Imagine if somebody just sat at home comfortable for their whole lives. Maybe they wouldn't be very deep people, right? Maybe they wouldn't have experienced danger, so it wouldn't have been quite as a full life. This happened to me also at the Air Force Academy. I went to the Air Force Academy for college and then pilot training, and then I was a pilot and I went to Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. And I'm from Orange County, California. It's beautiful every day here. Right now I'm living in San Clemente. I've lived in San Clemente for about 11 years now. I love it here. Before this, I was in San Juan Capistrano. It's cool, man. It's cool, but not like San Clemente. But still, I was very comfortable, right? You could ask the question, why go off, and become a pilot? You could die being a pilot, right? You could crash. There were several times that I almost killed myself, or I almost was killed. In fact, I did a video earlier, like very beginning of this project, the Philosopher, that you could check out. I almost crashed on my first solo flight, like an idiot. There were other times that people almost killed me, right? And when I imagine myself on my deathbed, I'm looking back at my whole life, I'm not going to be saying like, yeah, but at least I was a pilot, right? Or at least I surfed like this big of a wave, right? I don't think anybody's like that. I don't think any of us look back on our lives and say, yeah, man, I got a killer Wikipedia page, Oh, I got all these Super Bowl rings, sweet, man. At the end of our lives, we look back at those things and I think we don't think that much of them. Like, great, what am I going to do? Be buried with these rings, But the fact that we went through strife in order to achieve, oftentimes I think makes us better people, right? Makes our lives richer. So possibly this is a good decision for Bilbo which he actually does go out and goes with these dwarves on this quest. just because it's good to go on quests. And I really think that's what Tolkien's answer is. I do think it's kind of interesting that Bilbo goes out totally unprepared. I think that maybe that's not the wisest thing to do, right? Like he just goes out and says, okay, let's go, let's do this, and wanders out without any kind of preparation. That's probably unwise. But still, the fact that we go out and do things, I think is good. I mean, after all, there would be no story if Bilbo sat at home. No stories are written where there is no, there's no kind of strife at all to pass through. That would be a really boring story. Imagine the story, right? Bilbo said, no, thank you very much. And he lived fat, dumb, and happy for the rest of his life. Nothing bad ever happened to him. The end. Right? That would be a horrible story. The stories we want to read are stories where people have to overcome. So maybe this is a good thing. I think a second interesting philosophical question in this book is it ever okay to steal? Now, these dwarves want Bilbo to go there and steal the treasure for them, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. In fact, the dragon, when Bilbo actually finally gets there, asks that question, like, what were you going to do? Like, run out with you in your pockets? How were you going to get all this gold out? So I don't know why the story gets set up like that, but they want a thief, and Bilbo says that he's going to be a thief. The first question would be like, how would it be okay to say that you were a thief, right? Like, to make that your job, does that seem like a job that would be morally acceptable? Of course, it doesn't sound great. Let's look at some of the times where he does steal. The first time Bilbo steals, the dwarves and he are lost in a forest. They see a big firelight. They go towards it, and they see 3 huge trolls. They tell Bilbo, go in there and steal something, right? Bilbo goes in there and tries to pick one of their pockets just to prove what a dope thief he could be, right? He's never been a thief before. He's never stolen anything. This is his first steal. Now, stealing in order to impress others for sure doesn't seem right? If we're going to look at this ethically, most likely that is a terrible reason to steal. Of course, it might be different if those others that you're stealing with for, are requiring that of you on pain of death or something, or something bad like that, or that you just have to steal a little thing because I don't know. Maybe some of those reasons would be okay. You have to steal a little thing because you're just, as long as you do that, they'll leave you alone. I don't know. But he tries to steal from this troll. I think the interesting question here is it okay to steal from the bad guy? Trolls in this story are always bad. They kill, they steal, right? In fact, the stuff that they got in their pocket, they've probably stolen. They're in general bad things, right? They're bad creatures. Is it okay for him to go steal just because they're bad? I don't know. I mean, that is, it definitely makes you, if you knew somebody, a bad guy, let's say school bully, and the school bully leaves his locker open. Is it okay to steal out of his locker? I don't know. It doesn't say great, but it definitely feels like it's not as bad as if he were a really nice guy. So I don't know. Is it okay to steal from a troll when they're always bad guys and they've done bad things? That's the first question. I hope you notice I'm not answering all these questions. I'm throwing these questions out there. If you've got an opinion on it, I'd love to hear about it. Please comment below. Let's get a conversation going. Like I always say, Plato always said, the best philosophy happens in conversation, in dialogue. So the second time that Bilbo steals is not quite a steal at first. He finds a ring on the ground in a dark cave, doesn't really know what it is, and then finds out that this creature, Gollum, bad creature, is the original owner of this ring. Now, once Bilbo figures out that when he puts it on, he becomes invisible, now Bilbo keeps it because if he doesn't, Gollum, he surmises is going to kill him, and in fact, that's what it tells us in the story, is going to kill him. By the way, interesting, if you've ever read Plato's The Ring of Gyges, I've never found any connection between Tolkien and The Ring of Gyges, the ring from the Lord of the Rings series and The Ring of Gyges, but boy, it sure sounds familiar, right? So I'll probably do a video on the Ring of Gyges sometime. But if you haven't read that, I highly recommend that. Look that up, the Ring of Gyges. It's Gyges, I believe, something like that. Fascinating idea. Any case, he steals this ring to save himself. In other words, is it okay to steal to save your own life? That sure seems like it's a decent reason, right? So one interesting thing here is you might have started off by just saying, it is always wrong to steal. At least here we see a possible reason why stealing might be okay. Or maybe you might even say it's something that you should do, right? It's important for us to, protect these one precious lives that we have. And a little thing like you find the thing and you don't give it back, maybe you would say like that's something that's not really worth it, but something you should do. And there's, of course, also the question is that stealing in the first place? He found it. He never tells Gollum that he has it, but he doesn't give it back. Is that stealing if you get it and you didn't intentionally steal it, but it's not yours, and that you find out that the person is missing it? I don't know. Maybe that's stealing, maybe it's not. The third time he steals, all the dwarves have been captured by these elves, and they are all in jail cells. Bilbo is stealing food to survive while he is evading his captors, right? While he's evading these elves and trying to figure out a way to free his friends. Is it okay to steal to keep yourself out of jail? And that might sound like a pie in the sky kind of question, but if you think about it, there are some people that have to worry about this. There are some people who have to ask the question, do I do things that aren't always moral in order to just survive to the next day so that I don't go to jail for not paying off debts or something like that? Probably in the United States that happens plenty, but if not, in other countries, I'm sure that happens. Do I do immoral things in order to keep myself from being in prison? That's a third question we have. The fourth time he steals from the dragon horde. The dragon's there, he steals one thing, comes and brings it back to the dwarves to show, hey, look, I got something from the original pile of treasure. The question here is it stealing, or is it okay to steal if you're stealing back? If you're taking something back from somebody? Let's say that person had that thing for a long period of time, they've stole it first, and you're taking it back. Now, that does sound at first like, yeah, well, it's not really stealing, man, right? You're not doing anything wrong because you had it first. So we may want to say immediately, like, yeah, you don't want to preclude that. That's got to be something you're able to do. It's not something wrong. I don't know. Interesting ideas, though, if you think about stuff like ancestors doing wrong things to get stuff. So in one of my videos, the one I talk about native lands and giving them back possibly. I also talk about Nazis having stolen artwork. Years later, descendants, come back and say, "Hey, you have this piece of art. It's actually mine, but the Nazis stole it. Let's say your grandparents stole it." Is that steal? What if that person were to go and steal it out of your house back to their family? Is that considered stealing? Is that wrong? I don't know. Interesting questions. Finally, Bilbo steals, quote unquote, steals the Arkenstone, which is some precious treasure that the leader of the dwarves desperately wants. The leader's named Thorin. Thorin desperately wants. Now they tell him he can have a 14th of the treasure, and that he can pick whatever he wants. But it says he thinks in his mind, yeah, but this couldn't be part of that I get to pick. Right, this is probably one piece that wasn't intended in that bargain. If I came out and told them, "Hey, I found the Arkenstone," then they probably would say, "Well, that's not what we meant, right? We meant a 14th of the other treasures." He takes the Arkenstone in order to give it to a bunch of humans and elves, and the reason he does that, when the dwarves go into the mountain, The dragon thinks, oh, these guys must have gotten help from those humans down in that village. The dragon goes and destroys the village. And these humans show up and they say, hey, you guys stirred up the dragon. Here we are in need. Give us some of the money so we can buy food, so we can rebuild our town. And the dwarves say no. Thorin says no. Thorin is very proud and doesn't want to give a coin away if it means that he has to give it to people who are demanding, right? People coming up and say, hey, you owe us. He's not going to give any of it away, and he's going to even start a war. He sends some messengers to go bring some of his brethren to fight a war. Bilbo takes the Arkenstone, gives it to the other side, and says, look, if you want that back, it was my 14th of the treasure. You want that back, then you're going to give them a different 14th, a different cut. You can keep it out of my pocket. Is it okay to steal from a friend if it's in order to, in the best interest of that friend? So, for example, maybe your friend is doing something really bad. Maybe they are, I don't know. Maybe they are vaping all the time. I don't know if you vape. I don't want to judge, but it's not healthy, right? And so let's say your friend says, I don't want you to be unhealthy, and they take your vape pen. And is that wrong? If they're doing it for your own good, we might say, well, look, if I'm a grown man, I'm a grown boy, I should be able to make my own decisions. If you're my friend, you'll let me make my own decisions. And when we're talking about vape pens, that seems innocuous enough, right? Not totally innocuous, but innocuous enough. But what about if we're talking about something a little bit bigger, right? Something in this case that's going to start a war that eventually is going to lead to a lot of dead people. In fact, Thorin himself is going to die in this war. I know, spoiler alert, I should have said, but if you haven't read it yet, you should read it, man. You've had your time. But Thorin dies, and on his deathbed, he tells Bilbo, "You were right. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking the Arkenstone. You made a right choice because you were trying to protect me from a stupid mistake I was making." Is it okay to take the person's choice away from them if it's a friend that you're trying to help out? And that is the fifth time that he steals. I believe maybe he steals something else, but I can't really remember what it is if he does. I think as a final question, so I've given you two questions here. A final question that I'll give you, and then maybe I'll write a blog post on some other of the questions that I had here. But I gotta stop because it's so hot, dude. I'm in St. Clement right now. It is freaking hot, man. Yesterday it was up to 115. It's like Phoenix weather. I don't know. I didn't sign up for that. I'm in my studio and it's all closed up because the crickets are so loud outside, and it's sweating, man. So I got that sweat stash, that one that you constantly gotta. Looks like you're a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old is constantly got the mocos rolling. We call them the leaky faucet. All right, here's your question then. Do they owe these humans any kind of recompense? When, it seems like the humans come up and they say two reasons. Number one, it's your fault. If you hadn't come here and stirred up that dragon, we would still have a town. Number two, we are starving and we need that money to eat. So the question for the dwarves is it okay to withhold that? Do you have to give that money up? Thorin doesn't think so, that they need to give that money, because he looks at it this way. Look, I had no idea what the dragon was going to do. I'm just doing something that's totally okay to do, trying to take back my stuff, trying to take back my kingdom for my people. The dragon goes off and he kills all you guys. I didn't send him out there. I didn't tell him go do these things. And I couldn't have foreseen it happening, let's say. You might have foreseen it happening, but not reasonably, right? It's not something that you could have thought, you should have seen that coming. Maybe as a possibility, but not as, a good possibility or a plausibility. I don't know. In any case, or probability, that's a better word. In any case, sometimes we do things that are endanger others, and because they are low risk enough, when we actually cause some damage to that other person, the question stands: should we or should we not recompense that person? So, for example, let's say, every time you get in your car, you are endangering people. Something could go wrong on that car that you haven't foreseen, and you could go veering off and crash into their car or something like that. So, let's say, for example, you get in your car and a wheel falls off. And I know, you should have checked your wheels, but, anything can really happen. And let's say this is one of those things that you reasonably couldn't have foreseen. The wheel falls off for some fluke reason. You careen off and crash into somebody's car. That person can say, if you weren't in that car, then my car would be totally fine. So you owe me that money. You might say, well, look, there's no way I could have known that kind of a thing was happening. This is a risk that we all are taking, or it's a risk that maybe it seems plausible enough that you would not cause damage to other people. So I don't owe that recompense. That this is just bad luck. I don't know. Let me know what you think about this. Does Thorin owe those humans because of that? The second reason, because they're starving, that seems like a little bit more of a difficult one. I think the philosophical question here is it okay to demand when you're in need? To go up to somebody and say, you've got it, I need it, you should give to me. That seems not necessarily, I'm not saying that that's wrong or right, but definitely, I would say it feels almost better to just take it rather than demand it in that way. I don't know if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not totally sure what I think about that. I think again, I've already said that I'm a Christian in this video. So, as a Christian, I think Jesus tells us, you got to give that. You give up to those people who need it. But if I'm looking at it from a philosopher who's not a Christian, do you have the obligation to give those people in need? That's a good question for you. I think that's separate from the question, do you have the right to demand it? I think those two questions are interesting, because maybe one person is obliged to give, but the other person does not have the right to demand. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Anyway, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, fantastic book. I highly recommend it for you, for your children, for your children's children. Let me know in the comments if you thought of anything that you saw as philosophically interesting, or if there are any books that you are interested in hearing about. I'm reading the Lord of the Rings to the kids right now, and probably I'll eventually, once I get through that long series. Man, it takes forever. It's good, but it takes forever. When I get through that, I'll probably do something on that. But if are there any other fictional books or even philosophical books that you're interested in, let me know in the comments. Love to review something that you're interested in. That's all I got. Adios.